Okay, we're live.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second and final meeting for the month of June. Here at beautiful town of Mahone Bay, sun shining tonight. We've got quite a few citizens here with us that are going to tell us what a great job we're doing here on the council. I'm sure of that. But welcome to you and to the people at home that are joining us through the town's YouTube station. You look like you were going to say something, Councillor. We'll begin by acknowledging that we are gathered again tonight in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral, present, and future territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And tonight we gather with the intent followed by the living peace and friendship treaties, and we do so with respect, cooperation, and coexistence. We'll call the meeting to order. Just before we begin to get approval of the agenda, I would remind everyone that this is a formal meeting of council and all the usual procedures apply. And if you happen to be with us in chamber, there will be an opportunity for you to speak before the session actually begins. Once the council meeting is underway, that will not happen. But at the end of the meeting, there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions about anything that was discussed tonight. Okay? So with the meeting called to order, council, you have an agenda that was emailed to you. What is your wish?
Move the approval.
Okay, Councillor Carver seconds.
I'll second it with the proviso that we can add just an item under new business. I have a question about pedestrian safety.
Okay,
And just before we vote, can I also request one minor amendment? Can we add contract negotiations to the closed session?
okay. Lucky the hockey games are all finished. All right. So with those two additions, pedestrian safety under new business and contract negotiations under the closed session piece, mover and seconder is, they're okay with that? On the question, all in favor? Motion is carried. The agenda is now in play. Item number 2, minutes of the regular meeting of the 11th of June and a special meeting that was held on the 21st of June. Council?
Mayor, I'd move that we approve the minutes of the meeting of June 11th, 2024. That was the regular council meeting.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Carver. You've heard the motion, moved and seconded. On the question, all in favor? Thank you. Let's go to the special council meeting of June 21st, 2024.
Move that we approve as presented.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. And Councillor Lawrence-Croft, I assume you're seconding?
Yes.
Okay. You've heard the motion, moved and seconded. On the question, all in favor? Thank you. That motion is carried. We now have the public input session. I understand we have 5 people who would like to say something. So that's approximately 2.5 to 3 minutes per person. Okay? The total time allowed for this piece of the agenda is 15 minutes. So who would like to speak first? If you tell us who you are and what your address is in town.
I can go first, or do
Go
you
ahead.
wanna go? Oh, sure, mine's super quick, so Nick Pavlinek from 126 Hawthorne Road, just here to appreciate the town council's consideration of our amendment application for bylaw change for the Hawthorne Road area, and happy to answer any questions, but appreciate again the consideration of our application. Is that?
Thank you.
Jeff Rampton, 33 Pleasant Street. It is a question, but I think it's also a statement. I'm curious why the acquisition, sale, lease, and security use of the property didn't close session. Is there a good reason for that?
Yes.
Yes.
Would you like to speak to that? Or?
Well, we're not really taking questions at this time, but I'll stand by the answer that's already been given. The nature of the Municipal Government Act is that when you cite that, that's your reason for going into
It's
closed
very
session.
specific.
Okay.
Who else? Brian?
Okay, Brian Baltman, 54 Pleasant Street. Bylaw enforcement, a couple of bylaws coming up. I don't envy the bylaw enforcement officer who appears now to be under 24 hours a day duty in that there's a noise bylaw at night and parking during the day. A related question is on the parking issue. There's double white line all the way along Main Street. Theoretically, you're not allowed to cross a double white line. You have to over the full length of Main Street from the bank to Buckingham because of parked cars. So that's a question for consideration at some point.
Okay, we'll certainly make sure that question gets to our public works department. And it'll be a traffic safety issue.
Yes. The related question is a bylaw, rather a rezoning application on Main Street, which involves a remote lot.
Is there an issue about it that you wish to make a
Yes,
statement?
there is.
Okay,
The issue is there is no access to that route building lot. The reason for it has been changed is because they'd rather operate under a development agreement than under the land use bylaws. That seems the reason. The issue is that there isn't access because if there's 20 units going up there, then if there's an emergency, 20 cars or more coming down the hill, if the fire equipment or emergency services going up the hill, and it's just not wide enough. So,
Yes, it's on tonight's agenda.
okay.
and related to that is assuming that the bylaw is, the rezoning is approved, but nothing happens in the way of development for one reason or another, does the rezoning revert to the original rezoning?
Okay. I think we could hand that question on to the planning advisor or the people in Chester to get an answer, Mr. Hyde.
Once a zoning
No,
change is made, the zoning change is
It's
permanent.
done.
So the outcome is a hodgepodge of approvals, but nothing happening, approvals and nothing happening, it doesn't seem.
Okay,
Oh, I just couldn't hear what address we're talking about, or what.
I didn't hear the address mentioned.
This is 8.3A on the agenda,
Oh,
but in any case, we don't answer the question, so I guess.
No, that's right.
I think we're good. If you don't have any other comments, Brent.
Okay, do we have anyone else that would like to comment?
Yeah, Matt Present from 533 Main Street, operating as Spontaneous Bistro. I'm here about the noise bylaw. And I'd like to just express on a business level that it would be absolutely detrimental if we don't follow the regular guidelines of every municipality, which is 11 o'clock, it shuts down. And we as small businesses, we bring revenue to this town, so all I'm saying is that there's a benefit in that whole concept. And I think it's not ridiculous to ask us to shut down at 11 o'clock, and I shut down way earlier than 11 o'clock, you know, so 11 would be kind of the limit, but I think having a certain limit on attracting business to the town and local businesses I think, it, I mean, we need to promote it, and that's why we're here. And, I just think having a bylaw that stipulates what decibel level we can be at. Yeah, not pound the roof out of the restaurant kind of thing, but, for me to have basically a musician on the deck, with the proposal, it would be illegal. You know, and even having 20 guests on the decks laughing would be past the decibel levels that are proposed. And there's many businesses in town that I think would really be hurt by it.
Okay.
That's it.
Thank you. Yes,
I understood from the last time we visited.
and you, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my name is Betty of Betty's. I don't have an address in town. I have a business in town. I share with Danielle. The previous noise bylaw was based on decibel levels. The proposed bylaw is based on, I say that you made too much noise. That is more punitive than the decibel level. I don't even understand how we're revisiting this topic at all again. Clearly, it's understood if I live next door to somebody that was partying all night, that would be offensive. And to Matt's proposal is 11 PM to 7 AM, which is the norm coast to coast, would not be something that most people would object to. I think this posing one neighbor against another is ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. I don't even understand why this current council is revisiting this issue at all. I think this should be postponed until the new council is elected.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I'll jump in off the back of that. I think everybody knows me. I'm Danielle, of 319 Main and 299 Main and 538 and 558, multiple businesses in town. And clearly I have a vested interest here in a number of things, in parking bylaws and as well as noise bylaws. And to reiterate Betty's point, it's astounding to me that we are even sitting back in this room coming forward with a second round of this. The bylaw in itself, in my personal opinion, it creates absolute absurdity. So the church bells can ring at 10:01. And that's okay. A landscaper can mow a lawn at 6:15 in the morning. That's okay. A kid can't ride a skateboard down the street. Ordinary noise from people's backyards and sitting around a bonfire in the summer, not okay. Kids' birthday parties, not okay. The decibel level that was proposed is being proposed, and the entire thing is absolutely ridiculous. We can't enforce it. And it's also a drafting disaster. Like, I really encourage somebody to have a lawyer read what you put to paper. And I've said this in 3 council meetings now, and I read it and it's still absolutely just a freaking mess. The noises from machines that are permitted and not permitted, I'd love for somebody to actually try and define that and make sense of it. Landscaping and construction equipment is exempt. What does that actually mean? What qualifies as landscaping and construction equipment? Like, there's a lot of really, you guys honestly need to go back and revisit that. You should probably have a lawyer look at it, because that's what this is eventually going to come down to. What you've drafted is absolutely a disaster, and it's not even enforceable given what is currently on the book. I can't say enough how bad the drafting of it is. And if you guys are going to try and push this forward, then you might want to do some due diligence and actually get a lawyer involved today, because it goes without saying that this will end up having legal recourse.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
I didn't submit before, but it's Heidi Walsh Sampson from 906 Main Street. I would respectfully submit to council for big ticket items like the pool that future generations will be paying for, and other things that are non-essential, that you should defer that until after the election Anybody that feels very strongly on it amongst council should campaign for re-election on that basis and see how much appetite the electorate has for taking on more debt.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Simon Sampson, 906 Main Street. I would like to know what budget is left, if any, from the area in the town of Home Bay for the replanting of the back of the solar power. I realise that cannot happen at the moment because of the disastrous drainage effect caused by the town of Home Bay area and Goldbrook. What was the initial budget? What's left?
Okay, we'll find a way to get you that answer. All right. Let's move on with our agenda. To correspondence. 5.1.
Here on item 5.1, this is our annual note from Minister Lohr on
12-month notice.
12-month notice. I mean, no surprises in the note. I move that we receive and file item 5.1.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Now seconds, moved and seconded. Receive and file item 5.1 from Minister Lohr.
Mayor, I'd note on item 5.2, the
Wait, we didn't vote on that. Can we get a vote on the, that particular item?
let's do that.
All in favor? Motion's carried.
Mayor, I'd move on.
Second. Sorry, go ahead.
On 5.2, that's the letter from Mr. Haley
Yeah,
on School Street regarding his correspondence with Minister Lohr. I understand that the item addressed to Mr. Haley's correspondence is going to be dealt with by council at the audit meeting on the 18th of July. Of course, for the public, that's an open meeting. I'd encourage anybody in the community who has an interest to join us in council chambers to review that item. So I'd move, with that said, I'd move that we receive and file Mr. Haley's correspondence.
okay. Do we have a seconder, Councillor Wilson? All right, all in favor? Motion's carried. We've got 5.3, Mr. Pavlinik's MPS LUB amendment. CEO, would you like to comment on that?
I guess just to say that the actual, the staff report that contains the motion that is being proposed by staff in response to having received the official amendment request appears later on this
In
agenda.
6.2?
So I think this is intended to reinforce support for that. But as a piece of correspondence in and of itself, I'd suggest you just receive and file that correspondence.
So
Okay.
that being said, Mayor, I'd move that we receive and file item 5.3 and 5.4, the note from Tom McKeon.
Tom McEwen? Councillor Carver seconds. You heard those two in that motion. All in favor? Motion is carried. They are filed as well. Let's go to staff report. 6.1 staff report to council. This is the end of the month. This is the long and tedious report.
Hopefully not too tedious.
The one that Mr. Hyde waits for.
I
all
do
month
want to
long.
add that this one also includes the new budget, so it's not mostly updated, so it just passed last month, but the budget section has returned. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Councillor Carver.
Thank you. I have a question about the statistics section.
Yeah.
So that refers to the purchases and what was sold by the electric utility. So I'm just curious what was purchased was $638,000 and what was sold was $937,000, right? And what happens to the 300,000 difference?
Well, that's the cost of operating the utility, so that would be, maintenance of the grid, any borrowing that we've done for capital projects, staff salaries, equipment, gas equipment, essentially everything the utility does each month.
So it all goes back into the utility.
Yes, absolutely. If there were a surplus, it would go in the utilities reserve
Yeah.
to cover a year where there was a deficit.
Thank you.
Mayor, I'd move that we accept the staff report for information.
Okay, do we have a seconder? Councillor Carver, moved and seconded to accept the staff report at June 27th for information. All in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to 6.2. Municipal planning strategy and land use bylaw amendment request. This is the one to which Mr. Kablinik referred.
Yes, so this is received now by the planners, just to remind council of the regular cadence of this. They provide this report, Emily provided this report, coming to council to essentially enable the use of staff time by our contracted planning department staff at the municipality of Chester. So if council is inclined to see staff time put to working on this, and then a report that would be provided back to the scheduling of a public information meeting, and then a report on both back to the PAC. That's our usual process. If council is willing to provide consideration to a proposed amendment, ultimately the PAC would then determine whether to recommend that amendment to council. But in order to prepare the PAC for that, the planning department will put together a report and conduct a public information meeting to get the initial sentiment of the community. So that motion is included there as option number one, and the Chester folks like to provide an option. Also, you could not do that, which I think goes without saying. If there's any questions, we're happy to address those tonight.
Councillor Carver.
Yeah, I have a question about the clause that refers to allowing single and two-unit residential uses, parks by development permit only, and why would that be the case?
Where is it?
No, but it's in the section just beside the map.
Right in the middle of the paragraph.
The request is to allow, you mean? Yeah. Well, I guess that is a request, so I can't really, like, that's because that was what was requested by
That's
by Mr. Pavlinick and the.
It's the application, but I'm puzzled as to why, when in residential areas, usually a single house
It's driven by hydrology.
would be done by
So development permit is the as of right process. So this request
this is
is that,
development agreement.
no. This is, but if there's the sentence I think I'm looking at, if I get it correct, it would say the request is to allow single and two-unit residential uses in parks by development permit. So it's basically to say anything other than that
Oh, okay.
would not be permitted via development permit. Yeah, sorry. that
Okay, thank you.
hopefully helps.
Thank you.
Mayor, I thought that presentation really resonated with council last month. I think the presentation brought a lot of facts to the table that we may not have been aware of, especially the water table issues. So, you know, I think I'm inclined to support option one, and I'd move it forward for a review. I think that's the right thing to do. And then we'll see where what the planners come back with out of that.
I'll second that motion.
Pardon me?
I'll second that motion.
Okay. On the question, I have just one comment. When I was reading through the notes relative to this one, and it listed the relative anticipated amount of water available on different lots where you would be drilling a well. Thinking from what Councillor Carver just referred to, the question I think at the last meeting that we had with Mr. Pavlinick and the folks from up on Hawthorne Hill, one of the questions was, is there enough water up there to sustain all those properties? And I would wonder who did that, gathered that information, and what is the standard? Like, what's the norm in Nova Scotia in the subdivision in terms of how much water you have to have as a minimum in any one well?
I can tell you what it usually is. It's usually 3 gallons per minute.
Okay. But this wasn't listed in gallons per minute.
Or liters or something.
Yeah.
Something like that.
So, yeah, I don't think, I mean, as far as the consideration of water as rationale for rezoning, I guess that will be picked up in a report if there is a report.
Mhm.
But we don't have any statistical information or studies or anything to draw on for the.
So the developer would not have to refer to those numbers initially? I don't know.
So I think we have two, we have the land use issue, and then I think tangentially, we have the water table issue.
Yeah.
And so the fact that through the heritage of the development and where it came from and all the jigs and the reels over 25 years, we are where we are. The question is, maybe another house can be built up there and there won't be a water problem. Maybe 2 houses can be built, maybe 4. But how many can be built before it negatively impacts everyone's water? So I think that's an outstanding question. It's tangential to the proposed amendment. But I do think that we need to figure that out, both for the homeowner's sake and for the town's sake, knowing that for whatever, for all the reasons we're well aware of, we don't provide town water to that subdivision.
And the suggestion being made is just that there are types of zoning or permitted uses that may be more or less appropriate based on the availability of municipal water.
Exactly.
And that's for the PAC to contemplate.
And if
we pass it.
if it gets to a point where the economics are such, then you would be required to put town water up there down the road. So I think these are all the things the planners would figure out and come back to council with it in the report. If it gets approved.
All right. Thank you. We still have the motion on the table.
Yeah, I guess I'll just make a quick comment. I'm very reluctant to support this motion, having just spent almost 4 years studying this issue at great expense of time and money.
The land use
And
bylaw.
a
municipal
very
planning
large
should-
contingent of taxpayers on that committee that came to the conclusions they came to, and I think those conclusions are valid. I would wonder out loud if Councillor Feeney's suggestion is accurate, and we discovered that, let's say, there was only enough water up there to support the building of 3 more houses. What do we do with the owners of all the lots that are currently
Undeveloped.
empty? Tell them they can't build?
Well, I think that's what the bylaw, the amendment would suggest. It'd be unless you could facilitate service. Like it would really, it'd be any, I take your point, Councillor Wilson, that, I mean, I think the water table issue was an unknown. I don't think that had ever been discussed at council. I don't think anyone from the community had ever mentioned that was a problem, but that's no surprise given the amount of construction that's happened on Hawthorne, post-COVID. So we are where we are now. But at least we need to know the facts. I mean, we can't just have people, like, there's quite a few lots up there, I believe, that are for sale. I mean, people need to know that beyond being able to build, that they're actually going to be able to have water. I mean, that just strikes me as a reasonable assumption that if you buy a piece of property on Hawthorne Hill, that you're going to be able to dig it and drill a well. You know when you buy, you're not going to get town water. I think that's reasonable, but you need to know if the hydrology works too.
Yeah.
So that's not all, I'm not suggesting that's 100% on the town, but we can play a part in figuring that out. That's the only suggestion I'm making.
Okay. Councillor Carver.
So is there a way of not acting on either of these suggestions, but in having the hydrology study done? However, whatever kind of study would be required, and then think about how to address the problem that's been raised. The CAO is waiting to answer my question.
CAO.
Yeah, so I mean, that's absolutely in order on this, like, the issues have been raised. If council wanted to make a motion directing staff to come back with a report on specifically examining the, water availability on Hawthorne Road and possible solutions to any issues there, like, you could make a separate motion on that. It's really independent of whether the motion that's on the table goes forward, but I guess to the way that you put it, you could also then choose to table the motion on the table or defer, it's already on the table, so I guess table, to a later time to allow for that consideration. That you'd have to make a motion to table, I think, that's for on the, we're in discussion.
How far could the town get involved with this? I mean, people buy a piece of land. They have it tested. Sometimes they drill here, they don't get water. They have to drill somewhere else on their land. So is that really up to the town to decide? They
So-
buy a piece of land and if they get water or
So
not?
sure, the water is a problem, but this is a public safety issue. This is about no fire hydrants. This is about wildfires and having the ability to address a catastrophe. That's part of the conversation. It's not just how long you want to run your shower. It's also how would the fire department fight a fire back there, given that we don't have any hydrants, given that we don't have any town services? So that's all part of the mix, right?
But the water on each individual property isn't going to solve that problem.
No, fair enough. I'm just
Yeah.
suggesting that the context of the overall proposal has a number of facets. One of which is just how much more density can that neighborhood take? Given that we know that there are these limitations, and it's just based on the way that the subdivision evolved. The fact that we only have one entrance into the subdivision, the fact that there's only one way out. The fact that we don't have the other egress, all the things that we talked about last meeting. I mean, so, and the town needs to be part of that longer term plan on what happens over the next, the next 10 years up there. So I do think it's worth our while to take option one, send this to the planners and wait patiently for them to come back, and they may not come back for several months given their workload, but at least, it's on this or the next council will have a chance to look at that subject matter expertise, and they'll weigh in and they'll have some advice for council, this or the next one.
Or CAO.
I just want to make it super clear, it will be the next one.
No, fair
The
enough.
standard for this is up to 6 months, and I think it's certainly going to be after this. Council's turn.
Councillor.
I'm having trouble with supporting it too. And the research that went into the proposal and the request was phenomenal. But it somehow feels like putting the cart before the horse. Because we don't have the information about the water availability for safety, for fire suppression. And if having an extra egress to that area is the problem, is subdivision the answer to that problem? It's like, I can't quite get that the subdivision is the answer to the problems, the safety problem and the egress problem, the water availability for what fire suppression. So I think with that in mind, I think I would move to table this motion. Yes, I'm moving to table the motion.
And refer it firstly
There is a motion on the floor.
on the
right?
floor, yeah.
So feel free to call for the vote, Mayor.
No, but Penny's allowed to make a motion to table while a motion's on the floor.
Mhm.
Yeah, you should give a date as to when you're looking for.
Oh, to a date of,
Like, when do you want it to come back on the agenda according to this motion?
after.
October 20th.
After October, after some hydrological studies and some recommendations or information about how egress can be arranged in that area.
So that's the motion. It would need a seconder, and then I want to quickly comment something. but only
Okay,
if it's
do we
second.
have a seconder? Before we go for the seconder, would you repeat Councillor Carver's motion, please?
To table the motion until after hydrological studies and studies on egress can be provided to council.
Yeah,
I'll pretty it up a little bit.
I second that.
okay.
And then just a quick comment, so
On the
obviously.
question?
Yes.
Okay, go.
So just a quick comment on the question, obviously, if this were to pass, a subsequent motion would need to be to direct staff to actually carry out those studies. If no motion remained to that, then essentially the condition for tabling might never be met, so just to point that out.
Just on that point, Is the town, should the town's taxpayers be paying for this hydrological test on private land?
I mean, if I could just say, since there hasn't been a motion about the hydrological testing, that may inform the motion to be made. I was imagining the motion would be to direct staff to come back with a report on that, at which point an amount of money would be attached and council might be in a better position to address that question. But that would be at the discretion of whether this passes and then subsequently whether another motion is made.
And as the mover, my idea was that the study, the hydrological study be done on the availability of water for fire suppression, not on individual
For
properties.
domestic water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
that just comes down to the water availability in the hydrants down at the bottom of the hill.
Well, that's what the initial, I think, response was to when the issue was raised about water for fire suppression. The fire department and I think the provincial fire marshal's office determined an appropriate performance time to get a hose from the bottom of the hill to the top. And the fire department was doing that and met the parameters that were defined by the provincial fire department, provincial fire marshal. Because the owner of the subdivision wanted to, by not having central water, keep the per lot cost of the subdivision. So, it's a good question. So what do we do now? In terms of who pays freight for it? Anyway, we have a motion on the table.
Two motions, actually, but. fair
Well, the second one will take care of the first one. And then we're gonna need a third one. On the second motion to table the first motion. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, so we're not gonna table the motion. So we're back to the original motion again.
Optional.
And just to
Optional.
remind, if you don't mind, Kelly, Joe's original motion was.
That town council direct staff to schedule a public information meeting and prepare draft amendments to the NPS and LUB and related staff report.
And that goes to PSC.
Okay, that is the relevant motion. On the question, all in favor? That motion is carried. Okay. So that's the end of that one. Until we get the meeting scheduled. Crosswalk plague, 6.3. Councillor Carver, is this also your
It's related, but
pedestrian
it's not the
safety?
same
Not the same thing? Okay, sorry.
So if I might, on the staff report, Mr. Mayor, so this really just comes up because staff do receive requests concerning crosswalk flag installations. And we have kind of a legacy around when those were granted, and we're looking for some clarity from council going forward. All of the options outlined, 1 through 4 there in the analysis would be reasonable, but staff certainly don't feel there's any real significant cost to expansion of the crosswalk program or crosswalk flag program. So our recommendation is included there, which would essentially allow staff discretion on the installation of crosswalk flags without need for a sort of sponsoring organization, as I guess was the case in the past. Happy to take any questions.
Questions, council?
I really think that the crosswalk flags do serve a good purpose.
Yeah,
They have a great purpose, people going across, especially down by the intersection of Pleasant, going across from the Independent. That one there,
yeah,
people trying to get across, they hit the flag, at least you're gonna see.
yeah. And I see them being used quite frequently at the crossing at the 3 churches.
Yes.
Councilor
I'm
Carver?
prepared to make the motion with the addition of a phrase without a sponsoring organization or sponsoring group. So I move that council direct staff to proceed with installation of crosswalk flags without the requirement for a sponsoring group. at additional locations at the discretion of the manager of public works.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Owens Croft seconds. You've heard the motion duly seconded. On the question, all in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the solar garden ownership staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the solar and ownership report follows on a special meeting conducted on the 21st of June, where staff were directed to bring motions to council. The motions are included here. They are intended to be able to be made individually, but obviously there's a lot of interconnection between them. So if council wants to make them one at a time or all together or not at all, that's your discussion. I'm here to answer any questions you might have.
Councillor Feeney.
Mayor, as you know, we had that lengthy special purpose meeting on this topic on the 21st.
Yeah.
One of the, I guess, as we deliberated on all that information and the CAO made the points, I think it was a general consensus of around campus to take staff's recommendation and all the virtues that were discussed at the time. We did defer the motions to ensure that the motions could be well crafted and not rush them at the end of the last meeting, if you recall. So I do think the motions are in good shape, and I think there is a consensus. And I think everyone agrees that strategically this is a wise thing to do. So I think I'd start. I think we should move these motions along.
Okay. Would you be satisfied with all
Either way.
a motion with
I
three
do.
pieces?
Maybe I'll just start the first one, Mayor, if you wouldn't mind.
Okay.
I move the council resolves that the ownership of the solar garden will remain in the town of Mahone Bay, with the intention to sell power to the Mahone Bay electrical utility via a power purchase agreement.
Seconded by Councillor Carver. On the motion, all in favor? Motion's carried. Let's go to the second one.
I would move that council direct staff to write to the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, advising them of council's decision with respect to the ownership of the solar garden.
I'm sorry. So moved and seconded. On the question, all in favor? That motion is carried. Let's go to the third one.
I'll move that council direct staff to develop a draft power purchase agreement between the town of Mahone Bay and the Mahone Bay Electrical Utility for the consideration of council.
I'll second.
Okay. Moved and seconded. On the question, Councillor
I
Wilson?
do have a comment, and it may be appropriate here, is this, there's a question in this third one about where does the margin reside? The power purchase agreement will reflect either a profitability for the town or a reduced deficit for the electrical utility,
Mm-hmm.
or a bit of both. And how do we want that to look?
Yeah.
So we need to decide that before you go back and design a PDO.
CAO?
If it's a fixed price arrangement, the analysis of the production cost and the report with just an X where the price would be is probably enough for that discussion. I think it only gets to be challenged if we start talking about anything other than a fixed price agreement. And I will provide some analysis on that basis. I'm not quite sure whether it is even possible to construct it in that way, but we are looking into that. So yeah, I think it's generally going to be about what is the number and the best analysis we have at that time around the cost of production, in particular the borrowing costs and other things we talked about on Friday.
When would you expect us to be able to identify the total cost of the project? I mean, having the financing fees.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
think
what's
we discussed
contributing
on-
to what you were just?
Well, the operations and maintenance is probably the bigger point, and I think towards the end of July, we will have a good handle on that. I think we talked about on Friday, we can effectively estimate the financing costs now. We just have to be a little conservative. If there's a windfall on that, then that means that the production costs are a bit lower. and that benefit accrues to the town essentially automatically at that point based on the PPA. But we'll just have to consider that, doing our math on what we think that the borrowing cost will be, and council can determine that accordingly.
And that'll be a discussion for council in a future council meeting.
Yes, I would expect by the end of July at a council meeting by the end of July. I'm just essentially want to confirm some details on the operations and maintenance that are a little harder to estimate, but they're working on it now.
Okay. So on the motion, on the question? All in favor? The motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to the new pool.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So council will likely recall a meeting back in January where it was discussed what would we do with this proposed new pool, given that the initial cost estimates were certainly quite high, quite a bit higher than the town has the ability to pay for. And I think everybody around the table agreed on that. So we determined to finish the design work such that there was a costly proposal out there, and that is attached to this report. That represents the conclusion of a pre-design process with the Pool Society and Vigilant involved. And it's essentially, now that we have this anticipated price of $4 million attached to this design, fundraising activities can begin and potentially in the future reach a level where a future council would determine that this project could proceed. Ultimately, at this point, we've reached the end of any spending on design work, and upon publicizing this beginning fundraising activities, it would essentially be to future councils to determine if enough funds had been secured. So with all that work having been done, staff do have a recommended motion there to essentially make this well-known. The work has been done on the pre-design, and then solicit funds to support the potential future implementation of that design.
And that motion is to
included
begin
in
to
the-
publicize.
Yeah,
And
essentially,
around
we had a
pool.
report earlier this month where we said we put up a meter and we'd start to say if there are confirmed donations, and future councils can look at that and decide if the pool is ever in a position to proceed.
So this is not a yes vote to build the pool.
Certainly is not a yes vote to build the
No.
pool. The motion is in there. I can read it out.
Councillor Kerr.
So I have a question about the estimated cost. At one point, the figure was 4.5 million. And just recently, I heard a figure of 2.5 million. So was I imagining that? The 2.5 million?
2.5 is certainly not the figure in here. It's in the very last page of this 118
Yeah.
pages, but so this is coming in at about $4 million now.
Mhm.
Engineering estimates are conservative, but at the same time, this project wouldn't necessarily proceed for years. So better to be conservative, given the likelihood that things will cost even more in the future. So yeah, they put a few contingencies in there. Absent the contingencies, the subtotal was 2.68. That may be what you're thinking of.
Maybe.
But I think, realistically, if we're talking about building this pool several years down the road, 4 million is a good, the contingencies are necessary.
So I was in wishful thinking mode. And just for those who aren't aware, the opening of the pool is tomorrow. The pool will be open tomorrow, and there's a grand opening at 3:45.
It's from 2 to 5.
2 to 5.
And then 3:45, we anticipate announcing the beginning of the fundraising campaign and putting up that donation meter. And then, beginning the effort to raise funds.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes, we've already agreed, I guess, at this point that we can't afford this on its own. And we need lots of other monies inputs. My concern is that as we have a launch meeting tomorrow, and we have a fundraising effort, and we have this thing gets an aura of inevitability that can't be stopped, no matter what the circumstances. And I'm wondering if we shouldn't be thinking about some very specific targets about fundraising and timelines. It says if we can raise, let's say, $2 million by the end of 2025, then we're good to go. And if we can't, what do we do with the money that has been raised?
CAO.
So as far as what would we do with money that has been raised, any commitments to donate would be commitments to donate at a time in the future where the project were to move ahead. So we wouldn't be in a position to take those donations immediately. They'd have to be as a pledge towards the project.
Oh,
But if they were contingent on the pool being built, we would have to return.
That's what I'm saying, is if we had received the money, we would then have to return them certainly. But I don't think we would receive the money, I think we would get the pledges for it and then receive actual money and issue receipts for that money at a time in the future. Those details can be addressed separately.
Counselor Shane and Counselor Kerr.
So I think there's some important context. I mean, the town has made a financial commitment to the existing pool. We just, I think, invested $163,000 in giving the pool what we hope to be a 3 to 5 year life, extension of life. There's a new liner, and so that investment was very much made for the here and now, but it's not a forever investment. And the requirements to meet the accessibility guidelines are such that inevitably the existing pool would never meet those standards. I liken this to our original conversations around the fire hall development and the very first version of the fire hall, which was even more grandiose than we inevitably came up with. So this is the very beginning of a long-term process that's going to last probably until the end of the next town council, as they get started, and the plans will change, and the community's observations of the merits of the various elements of the project will change, and everyone will have a chance to weigh in, and they'll figure out what the town wants and what parts of it they can do without, and what parts they want to have prioritized, and which parts they think are redundant or too rich for us. So we'll see where we go. So this is certainly no commitment. This is just starting the process, and we'll see where it goes.
And just to the point about timeline, I think 2030 is the sort of accessibility objective. And so 2028 likely would be kind of have we reached the sufficient point to get construction tendered so that construction can be completed by 2030. So, from that perspective, and based on the investment in the retrofit, we're certainly good to continue to take donations and work towards a goal up to at least 2028. With the current facility still being able to meet both legislative requirements and physically continue to operate. And then post 2030, the current facility may not be able to continue to operate. So just to add to that in terms of the timeline.
Counselor Kerr.
Well, essentially, I was wanting to say what Councillor Feeney said about the idea that we are not voting tonight on committing to the pool. We are simply voting to create a scenario that makes a new pool possible. That's all we're doing, and I'm willing to make that motion. That council directs staff to publicize the design brief and associated estimates for the new pool project for fundraising purposes. I'll second that.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Lona Scott. You heard the motion duly seconded. On the question. All in favor? Plunge away. Tomorrow's pool opening will have some good news for the users of the pool anyway. Let's go with staff report on Canada's growing community canopy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There have been a couple of federal government announcements recently with respect to funding for adaptation to climate and specifically tree planting. We have been working on a few different approaches to tree planting within line with the approved budget and council's priorities around this. And Lauren, our climate and energy program manager, has provided a number of updates in here. So there is an update on the Nova Scotia Thriving Forest Program application, which has been successful. And the plan to plant approximately 2,550 tree seedlings within the Solar Garden Access Corridor easement. So that does address, to some extent, comments that were raised earlier during the public input session. But it only represents one facet of that effort at replanting. This specific report's recommendation concerns a different program aiming at the more complex issue of street trees and canopy restoration. Obviously, planting 2,550 seedlings along a town street is not the right approach. It's actually quite a bit more complex. We have a lot of stumps that will need removal, have complex plantings. The suggestion from staff is that we apply to this unique opportunity, the community canopies, and specifically focusing in on the street in town, which has lost the most canopy over the last decade, is Pleasant Street. We all know we've seen the removal of a lot of the Pleasant Street tree canopy. So that's the recommendation here. Ultimately, this would essentially serve as a pilot for canopy restoration projects in other parts of the community in the future. But it certainly wouldn't be possible without external funding. And I think we wanted to note that there were 2 additional sources of funding beyond the federal funding here. The federal funding is up to 50%. This would also be a project potentially council might want to prioritize for next year's beautification and streetscaping program application to the province. That's also a 50% matching program up to $25,000. So it's a pretty good fit. If we did end up in that situation, the town contribution would be very minimal. And finally, it should be stressed that we have a donation campaign around tree planting, and might be of particular interest to folks located on the street or everyone in general looking to see the restoration of that canopy. If you look at historic pictures, obviously the tree canopies in town were quite a bit more impressive than they are today. And so if even a small amount of monies were raised locally and leveraged against the federal and provincial sources, that program could likely go ahead with no taxpayer contribution. But the first step would be to look at the motion included here with respect to soliciting federal funding. Happy to take any questions.
A number of those trees are on Pleasant Street are on private property. Have we approached any of the owners to see if they were wanting to do this? We can't just go on their property and plant a tree.
So obviously there's a lot of discussion around the specific boundaries between the town and the private owners. I think councillors are well aware that some of the trees that came down were determined to be on private property and some were determined to be on public property. And in fact, some of those determinations over the years conflict with each other, depending on the staff and council members involved at the time.
Yeah.
Ultimately, there will be an effort as a part of this project, if it moves ahead, to work with the individual property owners to divide mutually acceptable property boundaries, which I think is a great thing. It would be a great thing to have all over town, but this project might serve as a good catalyst for that. There are some ways it's in someone's interest to have a recognition that the town owns a portion of what they may consider to be their lawn and they may maintain, which is really great. But ultimately, in terms of insurance and the town's responsibility to replant trees and take care of them and pay for all the costs associated, there are some strong motives for a property owner, I think, to want the town to own the street trees in front of their house. So those will have to take place in the form of discussions with individual property owners. I don't think that we're specifically promoting the notion of planting trees on private property through this program.
Councillor Finn.
I think there's a very iconic Bowen Bay postcard from the 20s, and it's set at the top of it's on the top of Pleasant Street looking back towards Main Street, and it's called the Shady Lane. And of course the canopy or the famous Sherman Hines photograph of Pleasant Street as well, completely shaded in canopy. And so the memories of someone who grew up on Pleasant Street. That being said, we had Peter Dunker here last year and was explaining to us that the benefits of the canopy increases the life expectancy of the underlying asphalt and concrete sidewalks by 40%. So beyond the beyond beautiful things, you also get a real economic benefit of shade on those things as well. So I think this is, hey, listen, we might as well apply and we'll see if we get the funding and we'll see if we're successful. So I would move that council direct staff to submit the application to the Growing Canadian Community Canopy Program. And best of luck.
Councillor Carver. You heard the motion, duly seconded. All in favor? Motion is carried. Thank you. I'll get my chair out and wait for the chair to appear.
Exactly.
Okay, let's go to 6.7, building official appointments. This in particular deals with a Mr. Langell and a Mr. Stevens, who are part of the Chester team. And they are going to be provided residential building official services to the town of Mahone Bay. So we have to appoint them to that role in our town. And this motion is that Jeff Langell and Jared Stevens be appointed as residential building officials in the town of Mahone Bay, effective immediately and until such time as that appointment may be revoked. So, do we have a seconder? Councillor Lawrence Crop.
I'll second that motion.
Thank you. Moved and seconded on the question. All in favor? Motion's carried. Okay. So let's go see. Next we have, the noise bylaw, first reading.
So even though this is a council item, I'll just comment why these are here as council items to remind people. It was the recommendation of the Policy and Strategy Committee that these bylaws, after going through the legal review, which they have done, will come to council's June 27th meeting for first reading. So because that set of minutes from that specific committee meeting was already received at council's last regular meeting, these are not attached to the minutes of the policy and strategy meeting, but rather appear as council items on the agenda. The motion that is in order on these is to give first reading. And if no councilors put that motion on the floor, then I would imagine after a period of time, the chair will move on to the next one. If anyone has questions, I can answer them here. I will note with the noise bylaw, there was a correction of a reference that was made earlier. And if I could just call council's attention to that. It was with respect to number 5B, and it just references actions taken by a person in a stationary car that produced unnecessary noise from the engine, exhaust system, braking system, or tire to road contact. And the correction here is to switch car to motor vehicle to be consistent with the Motor Vehicle Act, and also the fact that vehicles other than cars can certainly do this. So if everyone's good with that, and you do decide to give first reading, it would be to give first reading as amended. And thank you, Helga.
Yes. This has been a rather protracted discussion on the noise bylaw. For many of the years that I've been on council, we've been consistently contacted by citizens complaining about the noise, various types of noises, but vehicle noises in particular. The last time we had this bylaw proposed, we had a larger gallery than we have tonight. A week later, we got a letter from 100 citizens, signed by 100 citizens, imploring council to take some action with the noise issue in town. So just based on the sheer numbers, it would appear to be a big issue for a lot of people. But ultimately, with council decides or has to decide based on their values that they present to you as a candidate when they're going for election. What do they feel is the best approach or the best issue for the town of Mahone Bay? Not the 100 store owners or the 30 people that have got motorcycles and like to goose the straight pipes when they go up Main Street, or the diesel trucks that have got the big bloody exhausts on them that you can hear from many miles away. But what's the best thing to do for the life of the town, the life of the community? So there's going to be some people who are disappointed if we have a noise bylaw. If we don't have a noise bylaw, there's a different group of people that are gonna be disappointed. But council is turning to their personal value systems when they're attempting to come up with a response that in their mind, and you've chosen them to do that, and you'll choose again on October the 19th, they're going to make that decision as to what they think is the best thing for the town. So somebody commented they didn't know what we were doing back here discussing this because we discussed it 2 months ago. That's why we're back discussing it again. It's not just enough for 25 or 50 or even 100 people to say, oh, let's all go this way. The 7 people around this table have been selected by almost all of the people in town to make the decisions for them. Anyway. Councillor Wilson.
Just one comment, I will make the motion in a second, but it's important for people to understand, I think, and it can't be put in the text in any clear way, but these bylaws, all of these bylaws, and this one especially, are largely complaint driven. So we don't have a particular bylaw person running around town with a decibel meter trying to find someone who's infringing on the rules by 5%. The other thing that I want to say is, and I think it's unclear to people, the technicalities, but there are 2 things about decibel meters that are, and sound, that are important. One is the numbers on the decibel meter are logarithmic. So 7 is 10 times bigger than 6. It's not 13% bigger than 6. So when you go from 6 to 7, you're making a very large change. The other thing is that this is noise at a distance. So when people say, I can't even sit on my back deck and talk to my neighbor. Yes, you can, but you can't talk to your neighbor loud enough so it feels like you're sitting next to me on my deck, 200 feet away. That's the difference. And I think people either don't want to understand that or don't understand that. But it's certainly not, the bylaw is certainly not directed at making it difficult for people to do business in town.
Not at all.
But on the contrary, it's totally spent hours trying to design it, so it wouldn't do that. But it is designed to be able to go after people who are egregious in their breaking of the rules and do it to flaunt their independence, shall we say. So with that, I have a move that we accept this bylaw at first reading.
Thank you.
With that minor amendment I mentioned as the.
With the minor amendment.
Councillor Carver?
I'll second it.
Okay, on the question, Councillor Lawrence Croft, did you have a comment?
I just am glad this is going forward. I think it's needed in the town. I've heard for years and years from people and even more recently, many who I call the silent majority, who are not people who come to public meetings, they're intimidated to come to public meetings, but are very disturbed. Sometimes it's a bed and breakfast next door that they can't sleep all night. People who've come from away and they're having their vacation and yes, you want to have fun and whatnot, but this is reasonable noise. I've heard, we did have a lawyer look at this very closely and go over it many times. This was not done at a moment. It wasn't done to handle a one-off situation. This is a combination of disturbances that people have suffered the enjoyment of using their own property. I live next to the salt box. I live across from the liquor store. I have a very high quality of life. I have good neighbors. We're not talking about good neighbors who are reasonable and people just practicing their business. This is for the one-offs that continuously, it's not like the one time you have an anniversary party in your backyard and people get a little loud. This is for repetitive noise that is a disturbance. I don't consider music being disturbing to me. If someone's out playing their guitar around their campfire or in a business, that's nice noise, that's pleasant noise. We're not out to get people. We're here to be working for the better good of all the people of Mahone Bay. We're not directing this at any one particular group. We want everyone to be able to enjoy their homes and their property. So I'm glad to see this moving forward. Do we need to tweak it again between the first reading and the second reading? Maybe we do. And we will have those discussions and we'll have those public hearings as well.
Yeah, that's right. There'll be a public hearing after the. Councillor Carver.
I will support the motion. I really do believe that council has given a great deal of thought, and staff have given a great deal of thought to the input that has been heard from the public, both for and against, or with recommendations for changes to incorporate. There's been a lot of thought to incorporate the input from the public. And I'm just thinking that there is one business in town which has been operating for several years with a 10 o'clock deadline to move the noise indoors because of a development agreement. So the time has been extended from the original proposed bylaw from 9 o'clock until 10. And it's really based on people being good neighbors. Being good neighbors, good neighborship goes a long way, so I'll support the motion.
Okay. Councillor now.
Yeah, I think that most of the bylaw is very well intended, very well structured. The only part I have a problem with is the motor vehicles. I am very concerned about how we are going to enforce that. Somebody comes up in front of our house and we get it lots of times, they rev their motor up and also they let the parking buffer kick in. How are we gonna even, enforce that? But otherwise, I think, it's been well constructed, we've given it lots of thought. This is, I don't know how many times we've discussed it.
Yeah. Councillor Feeney?
I guess my only other thoughts are to acknowledge that on Councillor Now's point, some of this is addressing the, I guess, an opportunity provided to us from the provincial government, who's advocated responsibility for enforcing the modified mufflers that we've received dozens and dozens of complaints about, some as recently as last week. So, I think the inclusion of those elements, I take your point, Richard. I think that's fair. That's a fair point. But the province clearly has said through their legislation to the municipalities, they want us to pick up that function within the municipal bylaws. And so I think that those clauses do address that point. And we'll see how enforceable they are, and we'll see if they're effective. I think we all have our doubts, but I think including the modified muffler clauses, I think is worth a try. And I think it's by direction from the province. I think that's important for folks to understand.
Okay. On the question, first reading of the noise bylaw. All in favor? Motion's carried. How soon can we expect the public hearing, Mr. Hyde?
Well, I thought to comment after the parking bylaw, but the idea that was discussed at the recent policy and strategy committee meeting is to combine the hearings on the noise and parking bylaws if they both receive first reading tonight. And they would be duly advertised as soon as possible for 7 p.m. on the evening of the 17th at the community hall located at the fire station.
Okay. 17th, July. All right, thank you, council, for that one. Let's go to 7.2, the parking bylaw. This is largely driven by the changes to the land use bylaw and municipal planning strategy work that council did over the last 4 years. So. Do you want to
Yes,
make?
I mean, I guess, as you say, this essentially represents, what council had determined at the time when the planning strategy was approved without requirements for off-street parking in the commercial core. That therefore there would need to be maximized use, by the visiting traveling public and people going to the businesses of the spaces located on the street. And therefore, a bylaw such as this would allow the town to impose limitations on the amount of time that someone could remain parked, for example, on Main Street, such as to make those spaces available for the use of people visiting the businesses on Main Street, which may in fact have less available parking for customers as a result of the changes to the land use bylaw.
Okay. Councillor Feeney.
So Mayor, I think this was the grand bargain that we made during the land use bylaw deliberation, specifically around expanding the parking exemption to both sides of Main Street through the downtown commercial core.
Yeah.
And I think there was certainly a desire from the chamber, and I think almost all the businesses along the Main Street core that they wanted the parking exemption extended to both sides of Main Street. And as a result of that, I think there's also a general consensus that, that would drive a parking problem perhaps unless we implemented a duration. So I think this is the secondary aspect of that original decision from earlier, late last year or earlier this year. I'm losing track of time.
Okay.
And we'll see how it goes. And it can always, and changes will be made as we learn more about it.
Yeah, I guess we should specify the bylaw enables the town to set time limited parking through the erection of signage. So that is still something that we have discretion to move and change and evolve over time.
As the market.
The bylaw is what's required to institute that type of time limited signage and therefore be able to ticket offenses against that signage once it is in place.
Okay. Somebody wish to move a motion to?
I'd move that we move this to first reading.
Okay. Thank Councillor Carver, had you beat
No, that's
by
fine,
a hair there.
as long as they're.
Moved and seconded. For the first reading of the new parking bylaw. On the question. Anyone? All in favor? Motion's carried. Thank you. Let's go to committee reports. Social Open Doors Association. Do we have a formal representative on that committee? Councillor Carver, do you know?
It really is connected to the housing, South Shore, the housing issue. So if we don't have a representative on the committee, that is linked in with the South Shore Housing
Okay.
Advocacy Association.
I think the reason it appears here is because council directed staff by motion to include SOTA's reports in our committee
Yeah.
reports.
Yeah.
Okay.
Because it provides a different kind of information than the
Yeah.
SHAC reports. Not that we're getting reports from SHAC either, but.
Anyone have any would you respond to questions, Councillor Carver?
Right.
We have tried in the past, if you can, if not, we can. If anyone has any questions, we'll contact SSODA and find out what the answer is. Okay. Let's go to 8.2, the Climate and Environment Committee. Draft minutes.
There is a motion in this one.
Yeah. Councillor Carver, do you anything you wanna highlight?
Getting there.
Not the motion that Greg be requested to do something. You can leave that to Greg, I guess. I don't think we've ever had a motion that Greg be directed to do something.
No, we could do that.
Well, it says that he be requested to do something. Yeah.
So the committee is recommending to council that staff be directed to communicate to Atlantic Tree Solutions, the tree consultants, so that they are aware of our intention to develop an HWA hemlock woody adelgid monitoring process and design an analysis of treatment options.
We only have, I had a note that we only have 9 of those trees in town. Is that
9
true?
hemlocks,
Yeah,
really?
8 or 9, that's,
Wooded areas was too.
Yeah, I don't, it may be that in the street view inventory, there are only so many tagged. I'm actually not sure, it's possible that's where it comes from. But it's my understanding as a total layperson on the tree identification, that Jubilee Park contains quite a lot of them.
Mhm, mhm.
okay.
Yeah,
And
and they wouldn't be individually numbered.
yeah, and the whole back of the park cemetery land, across all those lands would be more hemlocks.
Okay.
They used to be known as the Hemlock Woods back there in the old deeds.
So for clarification, did we get a second here? I should wait for we have a second.
Oh, I made a motion.
You seconded
Just for clarification on the Land Tree
Moved and
Solutions.
seconded.
So Land Tree Solutions has been contracted to work with the town on developing our urban forest management plan. And therefore, I would take this motion to mean that if they can provide some guidance with respect to a hemlock woolly adaptive treatment program, we would be empowered by this motion to seek their assistance and sort of apply that against the existing budget towards the development of the urban forest management plan.
Okay. Moved and seconded. Could you repeat the motion, please?
That council direct staff to communicate to Atlantic Tree Solutions, the town's tree consultants, the town's intentions to develop a hemlock woolly adelgid, how do you say that word?
Adelgid.
Adelgid. HWA monitoring process and design analysis of treatment options.
Climate and Environment Committee is an educational episode every month.
It is.
Yeah. Okay, you've heard the motion, duly seconded. All in favor? Motion's carried. I think that was the only one. Yes. Let's go to the Planning Advisory Committee's draft minutes.
So I don't know that the deputy mayor has coordinated for anyone else to introduce motions from these minutes. Deputy mayor is the chair of this committee and not present tonight with regret. There are a number of motions in here, so maybe other members of council might volunteer to bring those motions forward.
I'm happy to, the first motion is, I think, is the motion about the lot on Main Street.
Yeah.
And it is that recommended the town council amend the land use bylaw on the municipal planning strategy to rezone the property at lot 1A Main Street, PD, blah, 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 to residential multi-unit.
How many blahs was that?
6.
Okay, yeah, fine.
I
All right.
got my glasses.
Seconder? Counselor now?
And that's evolving from commercial now?
Yes.
Commercial now
Yeah.
to residential multi-unit, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And just to be clear, because the cadence of the motion is a little different from how we normally do it, at the end of that, it said and schedule a public hearing, so this is essentially like giving first reading to the amendment. It's the coast council's intention to amend the bylaw, and then we do need to have a hearing on it. Just to be clear to everyone, it
So
doesn't
I should have said and.
You should have said and schedule.
Didn't say it there. It doesn't say
So
that.
that 6th block
That's
covered
scheduled.
it.
Oh, sorry, I was reading it from the staff report that, so that's not on Emily, that's on us in taking the PAC minutes, me in taking the PAC minutes. But Emily's original one did include the reference to the scheduling of a public
Okay,
hearing.
consider it amended.
Sorry about
My
that.
second vote is-
And is
Done.
that plot, that must be from the legacy of the front plot? The group.
It was commercial
Yeah,
when you
right.
used the
Yeah.
insurance
And just-
company.
And when it's subdivided, it just maintained its order.
That's right.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Okay, all in favor? Motion's carried. The second motion. It's,
Oh, is there another one? Yeah.
Mahone Bay Planning Advisory Committee recommends that town council amend the public participation in planning policy to remove references to advertisement in the newspaper.
And it is attached with that
That's
section.
attached to the administrative.
Okay,
Second.
all in favor? Okay. And the last one was that council give first reading to the subdivision bylaw.
And so similarly, that would involve then the scheduling of a public hearing at a later time in July, which will be duly advertised.
Okay, But we haven't had first reading, we're doing it now.
I'd like to make that motion, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Second,
Counselor Wilson? On the question. All in favor? That motion is carried. Thank you. Let's go to Council Remuneration Review Committee. Is this the part where they recommend 50,000?
That's what you're all waiting for. So I guess in kind of an odd circumstance here, despite this being a committee meeting, obviously this committee has no members of council on it. So I'm just going to introduce this report on behalf of Eric, who is the staff liaison who helped prepare this report from the committee. But I guess I wanted, we're not even looking at a report. The report's not, it's separate there. Sorry, I lost it there for a second.
Yeah.
So the minutes don't actually include a recommendation. Essentially the committee meeting ended with an agreement that a report would be provided by staff. So I guess I'll speak to the staff report, which isn't quite as unusual, and say that staff have attempted to reflect the discussions of the committee here with some of the supporting documentation and reference. Ultimately, the committee's minutes have been presented to council over the last number of months, and the mandate of the committee actually extends to the end of July. However, they were instructed to provide a report to council by the end of June. The intention of the recommendations here is to take into consideration that the committee can, and in their view, will execute any direction from council tonight within that term. So essentially, they'll meet again and as necessary to come back with a recommendation to council by the end of July with respect to any of the direction that is potentially to be provided subject to the motions that are recommended tonight. So this is not to punt it further than the original mandate of the committee. It will be wrapped up by the end of July. We have a little buffer here to address any questions council may have or to carry out the direction of council from tonight's meeting.
Councilor Feeney and then
Well, I
Councilor.
was just, going to compliment the committee's work. I mean, it's really an outstanding package. This was Colleen O'Neill and David and team. I'm missing a third community member whose name escapes me now. So this is in good shape. This is really coming in from Councilor Carver's original motion, which is 7 or 8 months ago now. I'd be inclined to support the committee's, extending the committee's mandate for another, month or two, so they could fully flesh out those other ideas that they have. It's been a terrific accomplishment for them to pull it together so well. So I would move that staff direct the council remuneration review committee to research and provide recommendations regarding potential stipend amount for attending special meetings. I think that's the first motion.
Councilor Carver.
I'll second the motion, and if I may comment.
Yeah.
For the public, council is not permitted to vote. I think it's not permitted, at least it's not good form for a council to vote its own remuneration. So it's designed so that one council will vote the conditions of remuneration that will apply to the next council. So we aren't doing this that we are going to be voting on changing the conditions of our remuneration. So the other thing is that because this one is recommending a potential consideration for a potential stipend amount for attending special meetings, in the package, it is shown that the members of the Mahone Bay Council, at least in the past few years, have been attending an extraordinary number of special meetings, many more than the competitor jurisdictions. So one assumes that's where that recommendation came from.
Okay. Councilor Wilson.
and I think this is just a terrible idea. It's subject to vast amounts of abuse, which.
The special meeting
Yeah,
aspect?
well, yeah, stipends for specialists and special. it's abused flagrantly in some of the municipalities,
Mhm.
not too far from here, in various ways. And it complicates the financial people downstairs trying to keep track of it. And I just think it's a bad thing to do.
Some special meetings are 4 hours long.
Some people, some are 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And some are at the Four Seasons Hotel in summer.
No, I agree wholeheartedly, Councillor Wilson. My motions really add respect for the work of the committee, and I'd like to at least see the report on how they would adjudicate it. So, I mean, if they're willing to put in the effort to flesh out the issues, I think that issue hopefully will be addressed, or if it's not addressed, then I think council may come to the same conclusion.
Yes, I seconded the motion, and spoke about it. That doesn't mean that I support the actual content of the idea of a stipend, because I agree that it's very fiddly and extra administrative work for
And-
everybody.
And I would think, Councillor Carver, depending on what the committee comes back with
Yeah,
the next time, we may say,
yeah, we'll see what they say. That's all. It's just a request for, if they've raised this question and they're offering to make a suggestion about how to implement it. Let's hear what they say.
Councillor Owens Scott, sorry, Councillor.
I had my hand up a while. I was very pleased to see the content of the work and some of the things that they brought forward, especially the amount of time we as counselors were preparing. We just don't go to meetings, we prepare, we do some of our own research, we go back and forth with staff asking questions, and just the time preparing and coming to meetings. But I was very shocked to see how much more we meet than other councils. And we're probably one of the lowest paid councils. And I don't think that's encouraging, where we're looking for people to put forward their names on ballots. To think that their work isn't even worth minimum wage when they give their time to council. And it also, and I understand where they want to do a stipend or whatever, and I sort of agree, it that can go down the wrong rabbit hole. But I think we need to address that we cannot expect diversity on our council if we don't offer a better way. If you're a single parent and you have to be out at all these meetings and you have to pay childcare, we don't want the table full of all the same people. We want diversity around the table and different voices and different experiences that can bring different voices to the table. And so I think they have to address either condensing the number of committees that we attend or something else if they're not going to offer some kind of compensation or included special meetings as part of our annual stipend. I just think we are not, I know we try and keep costs down, and it's a death for a politician to say yes to raising, their salaries and having salaries frozen. But I think if you want good people around your council table and diverse people, you've got to offer at least fairness for the work they are doing. And this really shows how much work is being done by councillors. And no one sees the work we do when people call us at home, or, you go for coffee with people. There's those kinds of things all the time. But I was glad to see that they captured that. Yes, we do serve, and it's a calling to be a politician. I really believe that. But I think we need to be fair about what we're offering. I mean, it's much better, and people say, well, it's much better than it used to be, but we need to treat people properly.
Fair.
And why aren't all these people there's so many people who say, we don't do anything, so why aren't they offered to come up and sit on council? There's a lot of people that would never put their names on a ballot. It's not an easy job, and it's, I think we have a very good council, but we still need to be treated fairly and equitable, and those are all goals that we say we care about. So I was pleased to see their report, and I think it's quite, it really hits the nail.
Hot coffee. isn't it?
Yeah.
So, Councillor Now had a
Yeah,
comment.
I agree with some of the points that Councillor Ravenscroft made. What you brought up, though, was with committees, some of that, this is saying special meetings, it doesn't include committee meetings, am I right in that or not?
Well, that's to be defined. I
That's to be
think,
defined, I would
Councillor
think.
Now, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean,
Are we
there's a
not
lot of
gonna
time there.
just special council meetings?
Once again, I think it's a precarious situation where it could be, I might go to a meeting, I might, who's to say whether, how long we're there, et cetera. And I think it leads to abuse. That somebody will be claiming things that they really
Yeah.
haven't put in the time for, so.
When you used to get meeting pay, I'm aware of one councillor in another jurisdiction who might have 3 meetings today, and he'd go back and forth to his home for every meeting. So we get paid to go back and forth for every one of his meetings.
Yeah.
And
So.
If I may, I just want to point out that on their comparator here, the committees are separate from the special meetings. So they're not.
They're not
separate.
covered.
Yeah.
really?
I
CAO.
think the points were well made, so I won't belabor it, but obviously with this proceeding, it will enable the new council, when they come in, to be equipped with the results of this committee's process, regardless of what this council's decisions or the final recommendations around the pay might be one of the first things that each new council does as they contemplate their meeting schedules, existence of committees and the workload, and make decisions on that basis. And I think it is illuminating to an incoming council to have this analysis and any subsequent analysis that might arise from this motion. All that being said, since the ice has been broken, I will say in a prior life, when I worked for the Department of Community and Government Services, a big part of my job was attempting to get rid of some very difficult situations that had arisen as a result of pay for meeting arrangements. So I would have a very hard time recommending that we institute that here.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Councillor Carver.
This is sort of hard to say, and it's, as a person who sits on a town council in Lunenburg County, I'm aware that the other 2 towns in Lunenburg County have remunerations that are 2/3 more, and another one is almost double the remuneration for this council. I really was expecting that this committee was going to come back with a recommendation that there be a little more equitable comparison with the other 2 towns. But I look at the comparators, they've provided all these numbers and the tables, and I have to accept that the Mahone Bay remuneration falls roughly at the 45. The median level is 45%, close to median level. So they are not recommending any adjustment to the remuneration for council at all. So the only change in remuneration for the next council will come in April when the cost of living is increased.
Well, yeah, but I don't consider that I mean, everybody's gonna get that, right?
No, but the end result is that this council remuneration is far less than the remuneration for councillors in Lunenburg and Bridgewater.
And I guess just even though it's been mentioned, but I should clarify, it's not a requirement that council rely on an external body to make those recommendations. So at the conclusion of this committee's process, council does have the opportunity to amend the remuneration policy without any external recommendation to do so. So I just wanted to mention it is in order, like there's no outside requirement that we defer, that we refer this to a remuneration committee. So they can complete their work, and if council feels that anything else needs to be done with respect to the amendment of policy, that is still an option. So not to say that that is our convention, but it's certainly an option out there for council members.
Okay.
So Mayor, just back to the motion, I do think it's worthwhile to at least hear what the committee has to say on these various topics. We'll duly consider the report when it comes back to us if if the group including Kim Saunders is also part of the committee, if the group comes back, we'll listen to what the package says, but I think it's worth our while to at least hear what they have to say about these other odds and ends. So I think, why don't we call for the motion? Call for the question on the
We're only
motion.
dealing with the first one.
Just the
now.
first
Yeah.
one, just the first one.
Okay, you've heard the motion on the question, all in favor? The motion is carried, we'll see what the group has to say,
On that,
the next piece.
and then Mayor, and this has come up from time to time, and certainly seemed to be much more prevalent 4 years ago in the last term. But again, I think hearing the committee's opinion on the topic is worthwhile. So I would direct staff via the Council Remuneration Committee to research and propose a mechanism to support elected officials with dependent care requirements.
I'll second that, and I'd like to speak to that.
Okay, on the question,
When,
go ahead.
oh, okay. I think this is marvelous to see this motion go forward, whether it's defeated or not, it makes people aware and their eyes open that there are people who cannot come to join a council like this because they have other responsibilities. And with the required meetings and the number of required meetings, it'd be wonderful if we could help support members around the table. And it would probably be a first in Nova Scotia. Wouldn't it be wonderful if Mahone Bay made something like this possible?
We had discussions, if I might, when we were considering this before, meeting pay. And we got into the situation where a person might not be able to run for council if they've got small children. And then the discussion went on to say, well, if one parent is on council, the other parent can provide the childcare. And they should not be getting paid a fee to look after their own children. It's the same with elder care, and that, I think the discussion fell apart at that point, because we never proceeded with it.
Well, excuse me, your worship, if there's a one-parent family.
That's
and
different.
there's no- I think it's probably ideal to go with a universal policy. And Bridgewater does have a policy that provides for extra pay for people who need care for infants or elder relatives, elder care. Bridgewater does have that policy in place.
Do they define the infant notion?
Do they define?
The infant, are we talking 5 and under? 10 and
Oh,
under?
God.
Well, you can't
I
be
think
left
that's
alone.
really too far into the weeds.
Your worship, I'm wondering how they handled it, the elder care question is the actual counselor.
So the motion
Or the
was,
president.
But that's what they're doing here, and then the family's got the night off, because
but also you.
the one man's gone to council.
This is elder care, is what I'm saying.
So Mayor, the motion just speaks to the offer to provide the research.
Oh,
And
yes.
to share with council their thoughts.
Yeah.
So I think it's, instead of, I guess, litigating the issue this evening.
Let's just go with
I
the
think
motion.
asking for the report, is a wise thing to do.
Yeah.
And may I add that it is more than, some people are sandwichers like I was. I was looking after elderly parents and raising my family. And there's all sorts of care that goes on in families and homes. And when my father was on council, when he got a call from a counselor that they had no babysitter, guess who was the babysitter? Me. That was how they handled it back in the 70s.
So I want to apologize publicly for having just rolled my eyes on YouTube. Really, this has been an amazingly non-equitable discussion. is quite shocking to me, actually. So I really think that the hearing more about equity would be quite useful. Thank you.
And Mayor, on the third,
You gotta vote.
do we have a vote on that
Oh,
one?
vote, no, we haven't voted on the second
I
one.
thought he was gonna comment.
No, I wasn't, sorry.
All right,
Forgot we were gonna vote on that one.
okay, and on the question, all in favor? Motion's carried.
On the third, suggested motion, just based on the quality of the report, I think we all have a lot of faith in Colleen O'Neill and Kim Saunders and David Lesiak and Eric. I'll be frank, I'm not entirely sure about the next motion's intent, like what specifically they're asking for, but I'm gonna give the committee the benefit of the doubt that it's gonna be something the council can respond to in some shape or form, so I would move the council direct staff to review the council-related policies with an equity lens and bring forward the recommendations on amendment. So I'm not sure what the intent of that equity lens will be, but I'm curious to find out what the report will suggest.
I'll second the motion to get it on the table, but I'm not going to support it. The motion is actually directing staff, not the committee, to provide information about policies with an equity lens.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to comment on that, Mr. Mayor. So this is intentionally distinct because it is not believed that can be accomplished within the timeframe of the committee. So we have, as you know now, a anti-racism and discrimination coordinator for the county. Unfortunately, that position is currently vacant. But I believe the intention here is that we would work with the person who will fill that position to bring a report to council on equity with respect to town council related policy. So that's what's intended by this motion.
But is that under the umbrella of council remuneration?
No, that's why this
just
one
writ
is.
large.
Yeah. So I think this will come, as, like it did with accessibility. If we sign on to a countywide plan, that the plan will include, review policies of all the units. So, we'd be getting ahead of that. Ultimately, I think if we didn't do this tonight, it will come back around as a recommendation of a anti-racism committee at some point, but that remains to be seen. But I did want to clarify, you won't be getting this report, before the election, is within the remuneration process, if this motion were to pass.
So this motion really isn't related to the remuneration, so it shouldn't have been.
It arose from the discussion of the committee, and it's my understanding the committee wanted to recommend it, but did not believe they could complete it within their mandate, especially with the vacancy of the position that would advise this, which we didn't really know was gonna happen.
I would just like to see that motion die and let it happen naturally with the new equity coordinator.
I think that's just as well, it either has to be voted on or withdrawn, so.
Yes.
So you're taking back your second, or
I don't
it'll
think
die if you take back your second?
No, the mover has to make the first move.
Everybody's on the same page on this.
Yeah.
Everybody's on the same page. on
Just
this.
gonna vote and get it done.
Okay. All in favor of the motion? Nobody's in favor of the motion. Motion is defeated.
Well, but we're gonna hear about equity. I mean, the council will hear about
Yeah.
equity from the equity coordinator.
Yeah, I'm missing somewhere.
So just for clarity, I think the consideration here is procedural more than anything. As part of the unified county-wide plan on equity that is anticipated sometime within the coming years, likely to be a legislative requirement of the province that municipalities have such plans. We do anticipate eventually signing on to a review of council-related policies. It's just that doing it now would mean doing it outside of that county-wide process.
Okay. 8.4, the Asset Management Committee, there are no motions in the minutes. And finally, the Policy and Strategy Committee with the draft stormwater bylaw. CAO, that's one of your pet peeve, your pet projects.
Yes, but I mean, these are minutes from the committee, so I know the committee discussed this very recently, and we do have attached bylaw, which was, I guess I will just add, created pursuant to the clause in the municipal planning strategy that was recently adopted back in February, which said that the town would then, subsequent to the adoption of the planning strategy, develop a stormwater management bylaw. The reason for which being there are stormwater scenarios that fall outside of the jurisdiction of the planning strategy, but were raised during the process and deemed by council to be a priority. So as you said, Mr. Mayor, one of my priorities was delivering a bylaw to the committee, and the committee has provided this recommendation.
Thank you very much.
So I would move that council provide first reading for the stormwater management bylaw.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Wilson? You've heard the motion on the question.
Question, so the timing of this public hearing, are we, I know we had, we also have other business as well. Do we see this in August?
So we
Or
have
September.
discussed the possibility of holding this hearing directly before the council meeting on the 25th of July.
Okay,
That has not at this point been confirmed, but I think that's what we've discussed.
okay.
So it essentially would take place at 6:30.
30,
And
okay,
then it would run until everyone present had the opportunity to speak, and then it move into the regular council meeting
okay,
session.
fair enough.
And if council's heard some stuff and wants to then direct staff to make revisions, it would then have time to come back to the first council meeting in September. Otherwise, we wouldn't have time to consider any input from the public. So that's the answer.
Okay. Anything else on the question? All those in favor of the motion? Motion is carried. Thank you. I think that is the end of our agenda.
One more recommendation.
Sure.
The newspaper thing.
Oh,
You gotta do the newspaper thing twice. I know we already did
Yeah.
it, but we have two policies that reference advertisements in the newspaper.
And I had that.
We no longer have to do the newspaper.
Thank you,
Okay,
Minister
very-
Lore.
Can
We
I
do
make
it
that,
differently, yeah.
can I make that motion?
Yes, please.
Council amend the town council policy section 419 to remove the requirement for newspaper advertisement during the bylaw approval process.
We have a seconder, Councillor Carver. Moved and seconded. You've heard the motion. On the question? All in favor? There goes the newspaper.
Yes.
So under new business that I had asked to
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
add, it's about the crossing at Clearway and Main. And I had received some communication from a citizen a few weeks ago with very, very detailed description of problems that had been encountered, pedestrian safety, very close calls with cars. The person who had been pushing a child in a stroller, I mean, it was a very, very scary and repeated scary situations there. And the problem was described in great detail with maps and pictures and descriptions and so on. And so I forwarded it to the traffic authority, our CAO, and just asked for some contact and what could be done here. So I just wondered, because I know there's been some correspondence now that's very, very recently, shortly before this meeting, and I wondered if there's just a couple of minutes to say what might be happening in response to that.
Yeah, I can certainly speak to it. It's just, essentially we do have a lot of safety concerns from pedestrians using the intersection. One would think that they would come from the new stop signs and we've been there for 3 or 4 years now, and people perhaps not adhering to them. In fact, we get reports and have seen firsthand at the staff level, people not adhering to the Clearway stop sign just as much as the other two, even though the Clearway stop sign has existed since the street existed. So for whatever reason, there is a serious issue at that intersection with people disregarding the stop control from all directions. And there have been near misses on the pedestrian crossing on numerous occasions. Staff have reviewed it. We have stop ahead signs in every direction. The visibility on the stop signs is good. Painting is renewed regularly, and we're in the process of renewing all the painting this summer. every part of the guidance that is out there in terms of design of an intersection has been followed. And we even have gone to the optional length of having the red flashing lights on the stop signs to further draw attention to them. So there are not too many more things that can be done. And, you know, essentially with markings and signage alone, really not anything additional that can be done that I can recommend. I did mention in response to this inquiry, there is another treatment for stop signs. Some of you may see it around. So we have the red light flashing on top. There is a inlaid boundary of flashing lights around the outside of a stop sign that may be more eye-catching to some. Those are installed sometimes in areas where poor adherence to stop signs has been an issue. I think it's as much of a change as anything. People will notice a new type of stop sign there because it's new. So that's something we could do. The cost is relatively minimal. Other than that, I think it's an enforcement issue, which we have been working with the RCMP. Hopefully they can do more rolling stop enforcement, adherence to stop sign enforcement there. It is a difficult spot for them in the sense that it could be kind of hard to actually pull someone aside at that intersection. So they'll have to figure out how to deal with those issues. But ultimately, I can't recommend any further change to the painting or markings. I do fully agree that there's still challenges with safety there, but ultimately I don't think that they result from any absence of parking or signage or markings. So as far as the stop sign change, we're in new business. We can't really get it out to direction of council. I don't necessarily think we need a direction of council. If council were supportive, that's something that can be done at a staff level. Alternatively, we could have a notice of motion for a subsequent meeting.
I might give a notice of motion and then not act on it, because I have to think about it and perhaps talk some more with you about what might be possible. It's a notice of motion.
Right.
Yeah, I've brought this to the attention of the police advisory many times. If a rolling stop to that, I can't get out my driveway because of it, because people are not stopping. If there's a car in front of them, they're just rolling through that intersection on a regular basis. But I'm wondering, the crosswalk signs that flash, those orange bright, have you seen it? Like,
Well, we have rectangular rapid flashing beacon crossings at 2 crossings in town, but they're not typically used at a stop controlled intersection. So they're usually used to draw attention to, as you say, a pedestrian crossing sign. But at a stop sign, people are required to stop. So
exactly.
you're not really trying to have something that a pedestrian activates, because the implication then is that absent that activation, you don't need to stop. It's a stop sign, so you definitely still need to stop.
Right.
So that's where like a push button effect on an existing stop sign can be detrimental to adherence to the stop. And that's why I wouldn't recommend it there. The next step up is, if we were in the city, would be traffic lights. But I'm hesitant to recommend them in response to this particular issue. People are far less likely to run a red light.
Well, I've made a notice of motion. I'll try to bring something back next time.
Sure. And I can kind of talk to you with it.
Okay. So that's the safety piece. And the other one that you wanted to add, Mr. Hyde, is in the in-camera portion.
Yes, and we're just coming up on that now, so
Yeah,
I just,
so
when
we
you
have-
do the motion, I wanna cite, contract negotiations along.
We have, we've concluded our agenda for tonight. The item 10 is a closed session. So I would ask the folks that are here in the room if they have any comments or questions about anything that was discussed through our agenda tonight.
The intrepid few.
We fell asleep, sorry. No. 2 things, on behalf of the Mahoney Center, we'd like to express our appreciation to the town for the financial support we received this year for the municipal, Heritage Municipal Building grant, and also the grant we received, and we're gonna start up the Senator Talks again, which was a really successful thing. And I want to send a special thank you to Kelly here, who really worked hard with us and provincial government to get our status actually done and backtracked when it should be. So that allowed us to go back and look at past expenditures and going through that right now closely. And so thank you on behalf of that. So that's what happened when we said, cut me off and up further. One of the hard things I think in these meetings is when you can't ask questions when you're talking about topics. Is I think there's people here may have good comments. Now, I don't know if structurally you can't change that or not, but it'd be really something worth looking at. The other thing is when you are talking about a topic, it'd be really helpful for us, I'm sure the people online, just give a real quick one sentence what the discussion is about. Like you guys, you'll talk about, okay, something, and you guys all know what it is, but the average person isn't gonna go through the 108 pages of attachments, okay? So it'd really be helpful if you just start off and say, this topic is about blah, 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 and then you carry on your conversation. I do have a question when you were talking about the land use bylaw modification for Hawthorne Hill. If I understood, I don't know the background, but if I understood that, the developer, I'm assuming there's still a developer that owns a bunch of land up there, if I'm not mistaken, or somebody owns a bunch of land up there. If, as a town, we're gonna start testing to see if they have good water, I think you're going down a slippery hill there, because number one, I could come to you and say, geez, I'd like to get off town water. Could you come and check mine out too? So, you know, you'll be setting a precedent there, be very careful with that. And I don't think taxpayers should be paying to support developers in that sense, okay? And the last comment on the new pool, I just think we're doing something a little backwards here. Yeah, I think most people in this town support the kind of pool we have today. But when we're talking about a major expenditure for an indoor pool, before we go off. to-
What do you?
Not indoor pool.
No,
No, not an indoor.
Indoor, you
Not an
say
indoor pool.
inside a pool.
well, that's what I understand we're talking about.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we're still talking about then an outdoor pool, correct?
Yeah.
So, tell you right now, going around town, that's what people believe. It's a year-round indoor pool, okay? That's what's out there, okay? So, it's gotta be clarified. And one of the things, you know, if we're gonna do that, to me, it would make sense that we have a public hearing first and say, we're thinking of replacing the pool. What do all you people? And then you launch off and do your things. Like for the, like, I don't know, how much does it cost to do the pre-design? I'm sure it's somewhere. How much does that cost? Of the new-
40 grand.
40 grand. So before we go off and spend 40 grand, we may just want, on these kind of major expenditures, just have a hearing with people first, you know, or a general discussion and say, we're thinking of doing this. What does everybody think? Because they may all come back and say, no, we don't want to do it, or they may just say, yeah, go for it. So, you know, I've been to a couple of these meetings and we talk about transparency and we talk about, you know, involving the community. These are the opportunities you guys have. With my comments, thank you.
Okay.
Jeff.
Well, actually, I want to comment to what this gentleman just said, because I think one of the issues that we have as a community is communication. And I don't know how to combat that or how to deal with that, but there seems to be a communication issue because he mentioned having a public hearing, which is always a good idea, but there was an online survey which was put out on your website and, you know, ask people for their input. I gave mine, but a lot of people probably didn't see it. And so I don't know how you're gonna tackle that, but it's something that has to be tackled, is how to get this word out. Because we don't have a town newspaper, for example, like a lot of people still like be tacked on.
But we have a
paper.
newsletter and it.
There you
the
go.
survey
I agree.
That it was in that, it goes to every mailbox.
I think that process you're talking about, that whole communications piece, is what is going to begin in earnest now that council has made the decision tonight that they've made. Didn't make a decision to build the pool, didn't make a decision on the final design. We made a decision on getting out there, talking with people, and looking at the project and developing the scope of the project. Ultimately, it may all be for naught if council doesn't want to spend the $4.5 million to build a swimming pool.
For 2 months. Yeah,
Right?
Something else, sorry.
But those, I'll finish after.
Okay, The other thing I meant to mention as well, so for people, for residents in this town, and businesses, I'm assuming as well. Whenever we're talking about a major project, okay, it can't just be, this is what it's gonna cost to build it. We need to understand clearly, this is what it's gonna cost to maintain it. This is gonna require additional people, salaries, you know, all things that go with that, okay? And the bottom line is what does that impact on my taxes? So pick a $350,000 evaluation as an average and say, we go and spend $4 million on something, that's gonna cost each taxpayer in this town $1,000 a year, whatever. People can relate to that. Okay, whatever, you know, don't do my math, I just made that up, but whatever that is, okay, you've gotta make it so that people understand, because what goes on out there is people talk, right, make debate. I heard him say this, and I heard him say that. Come out, make it clear, don't make them go through 180 pages. You wanna build a pool, here's what we think the cost is gonna be. Here's what it's gonna cost you, Mr. Taxpayer.
Just 2 quick points. Thank Helga to mentioning the survey. 150 people responded to that survey that was publicly reported to council last September. So that's pretty good in a small town. And just as far as the point about, you know, what does it cost every taxpayer? I think it's important to mention again, even though it was certainly mentioned earlier, if the pool costs $4 million to build, the town's taxpayers certainly will not pay $4 million to build it. Council's decisions around major infrastructure rest on the availability of external funds. The question becomes, at what level of external funding? Is it 3 out of 4? Is it 3.5 out of 4? Is it 4 out of 4? In which case it's free. Would you then, as a resident, say this is worth proceeding? And ultimately, that's council's decision. So for council to say to people, would you prefer to spend $4 million on a pool? I'm quite certain no one would say yes. But would you say, can we ask the federal government? And if they give us $4 million, then would you like a free pool? I would imagine everyone would say yes. So as with all public polls, it's how you create the question that will result in an answer.
But Dylan, if you say in there, yes, we could get 100% funding to build that pool, but if it's a pool, and you need people to man that pool, to maintain it, that's gotta be built into the cost. Okay? If you're gonna finance it over 10 years, okay, what is the cost to this town to finance that, or whatever it is over 10 years? It's gotta be transparent to everybody.
Okay,
Fair enough.
did you have a question?
I did have a question.
Okay,
My name is Len Spencer. I live at 64 Pleasant here in town. And when I start coming and taking notes, I'll have more questions. But today, this is from memory, and I'm glad that it was mentioned. The thing about the pool is that I'm not really too concerned about what will happen if the amount of funding that will come from another source. My thinking is that even if the pool arrives and is completely funded, and is free is the word that you use, that's a really strong word for something that in the future won't be free, because we'll have to pay to maintain it for the life of the pool. And what's the cost of that? And my question is, what kind of diligence has been done on what it would cost to maintain a pool of a value of $4 million? And what will that cost us as taxpayers to service this free pool, potential free pool?
Can I speak to that? So that was certainly a major factor in the design. The Pool Society made it very clear from the beginning, you know, we get a certain amount from the town each year for operations, we raise a certain amount through fees. We want to be able to operate any new pool within that same expectation. So obviously there'd be an expectation of some, you know, CPI growth over the course of the lifespan of the pool. But this design that is out there now for consideration of the public is really based on maintaining the current cost. And immediately that will draw criticism of, well, so it's only gonna be open for 2 months out of the year? Well, that's part of how the costs are kept in check currently. As soon as you start talking about going beyond that, you need professional lifeguards, you need a lot of different things that will cost more money. So if it operates the same schedule with the same programming, the new pool design is intended, and work has been done to verify, to operate at relatively equivalent cost of the same pool that we have today. That being said, there is one thing we didn't do with the last pool that is always recommended, and council can decide whether to do it, which is to say, do we start upon opening a brand new facility, putting aside money for the eventual replacement of the facility? Right, that's up to the council of the day. It's not really strictly speaking an operating cost, but it is a consideration. And I will say with the old pool, we didn't do that, which is why we're now talking about where to get the money.
So if I just may follow up to what you just said, that clarification, that was great, but that's excellent. That's the kind of stuff that needs to get communicated, okay, so people out there go, oh, okay, that makes sense, okay, I get it, okay? All the comments here are, they make it like so much easier just communicating that.
I just make a comment.
Yes, Councilor Garvey gets the last comment.
How
Well,
does it
it's
affect
always,
the
as Helga said, the communications issue is always such a huge, huge challenge. And I always think of what happened in the district of Chester, when they were doing a new project, and they quite literally spent 4 years having focus groups in every single nook and cranny of the whole district. And people at the end of that were still saying, nobody told me, nobody asked me. It's a huge, I totally appreciate what you're saying, Jeff, but the communications issue and getting things out of my brain into somebody else's brain is really, it's a mystery. It's a mysterious process.
And Paquito, go
Just
ahead.
a little, and it's more than a pool. Hearing people say, well, I don't swim, I will never use that pool. There are people who refuse to pay their taxes still for the LCLC in Model. They cut that piece off. We want professionals to come to our area. We have people without doctors and nurse practitioners, primary care. They're not gonna come to Mahone Bay if they have to drive their kids to Bridgewater and Lunenburg to go swimming or to have something to do in the summer. You have to provide a place where people want to come and live and work. And you have to get a better picture than, I won't use it, I won't, but for the greater good of the community. And this is happening in communities. They can go anywhere in the world. They can go to Toronto and they can have the best of the arts, the best of the sports, the best of the schools, the best of the university. Do they want to come to a community like Mahone Bay? Do they want to come to a community like Bridgewater or Lunenburg? That's what they look for. They check out social media. When they hear people naysaying everything that's being done in the town, they see that. Do they want to come? Do they want to practice and take on cases with people who complain continuously, who are unhappy? And this is what happens when they're recruiting is one thing, but maintaining and keeping your professionals in this area is a real issue. We have to provide happy, pleasant communities that people want to live to.
I don't think anybody disagrees with that. You have to be clear. No, hold on, because Suzanne just put, Councillor just put something on the table, okay? I don't think anybody here disagrees we have to offer, we keep talking about offering an affordable community, okay? The discussions on, lower cost housing, okay? Which means, okay, we need to attract people, we need to keep costs down. I don't think the majority of people in this town would have an exception to an indoor pool, okay? What I'm saying to you is going around town, it's an indoor pool, okay, because it hasn't been clearly communicated. And, Councillor Carver, I'm not saying you do a focus group in a corner, but, we have a great newsletter, okay, come out, we're looking at a pool, okay, trying to get funding, we're gonna get matching funding, okay. Our objective is to not, for an outdoor pool, the objective is not to have a cost for us as a town. And here's what the maintenance cost would be. I think people would sign up for it. I'd sign up for it. Okay, I'm not against that.
We'll certainly take that point under advisement.
No, they're all good points, but
The activities to date would not seem to support that. I don't care how many times you say it, even if you say it 10 times, you'll still have somebody show up and say, well, geez, I didn't know anything about that.
There's a builder.
And worth reminding, this was the beginning of that public information process, so it
that's-
will appear.
This is day one. We're gonna go from there.
Newsletter.
Okay.
So there are some people online, just so you don't forget.
Do they have questions?
There's a few questions. what was the cost of the preliminary designs, et cetera, for the future pool, which I think was answered, but.
I don't think it was answered accurately, but I don't have the information at my fingertips, so if that person wants to follow up by email, they can either
Okay,
give
they
their
can
address or write to us.
Email clerk@townholmbay.ca. Would it be advisable to have an estimate of operating expenses before fundraising? I believe this is also associated with the pool.
Yeah,
What if successful in fundraising, construction costs only to find out the operating costs are excessive? I believe it's been
Which I think we've
answered.
spoken to, but point taken, it would be good to reference that in written materials going
but
forward.
the goal right now is that the operating costs will
Remain generally. equivalent.
remain generally the same as what they have been. Okay,
And one last one, is the intention of the stormwater bylaw to only address new issues brought forward after adoption, or will it also address previously existing issues?
I guess I would encourage anyone to read the bylaw. It has very broad application. The requirement for permitting before work taking place clearly can't apply to work that has already taken place. But there are within the bylaw responsibilities on property owners with respect to stormwater management that would apply even to a property owner who had subsequently made changes to their property. So take a look at the bylaw. Hopefully it will answer that question, and there will be a hearing coming up. You're welcome to come out to as well. But yeah, I think it's a tough thing to say. It doesn't work exactly the same as the land use process. So for fear that if it's done, then for all time it's permittable. That is not the way that the stormwater works. But clearly the permitting requirements can't be applied retroactively.
okay. Thank you.
How many are online?
16.
Excellent.
Very good.
Yeah.
Well, thank you,
See you, John.
Jeff. Thank you.
Excellent.
We're going to close off that portion of the
Need a motion to
meeting.
go in camera first or close that.
That's right. But before we do, I would like to thank the folks at home who joined us on YouTube, even from as far away as Victoria. But with that in mind, I will entertain a motion to go in camera. Moved? Seconded? All in favor? Okay, give us 5 minutes to get it done.
Sale, lease and security of municipal property.